Just about 2 minutes until we kick off tonight's community chat with Erin Bonilla. She is the Flight Ready Systems Chief Operating Officer and an analog astronaut, which is absolutely amazing. We're going to get going at 6:15 in 2 minutes. Stick with us. We'll be right back. One more minute to lift off, which is a reference to our fantastic guest tonight, Erin Bonilla. She has traveled the world. She has practiced. She has prepared. She just got back from a mission to Hawaii as if it were Mars. We're going to be talking about that and also skydiving at night. We'll get going quick. All right, it is 6:15. Erin Bonilla, it is an honor and a privilege to have you here. Technically, you are the Flight Ready Systems Officer or Chief Operating Officer of Flight Ready Systems. You're an analog astronaut. You've been training, I guess, for the last 8 years now, it seems like, if not longer, to prepare other human beings for space travel. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I wasn't expecting to come out of a space simulation and be back in a space simulation. In isolation, but
so what do you mean by that? You just came out of a space simulation. These are things that not many people actually hear in their daily lives.
So in January, I participated in a Mars simulation mission, and the purpose of that is to live in a habitat and simulate or practice, pretend, however you want to say it, being on Mars. Mm-hmm. And so the purpose of that is to conduct research in that environment. And we're talking about scientific research, psychological research, educational outreach activities, all kinds of stuff. But it's to conduct those things inside of a Mars simulation so that the products that are produced from them are Mars centric. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So yeah, go ahead.
What do you mean by that? So a Mars simulation, there aren't houses on Mars right now. So what are you actually simulating?
So a couple of things. So let me explain the habitat first. So the habitat we were living in is a geodesic dome structure that was on the side of a volcano in Hawaii. And it sat up at about 8,200 feet in elevation. And was way out on the volcanic field. So there's no life out there. So the terrain very closely mimicked that of Mars. Mm-hmm. So when we were simulating the mission, we were inside this habitat and we couldn't walk outside unless we were in simulated spacesuits. There you go. That's the high seas habitat in Hawaii on the side of Mauna Loa. Mm-hmm. And so when we needed to leave the habitat and go do research out in the volcanic fields, we had to put on the simulated spacesuits, go through depressurization, and then step outside. And we could never take off our helmets, anything, or it would be like breaking the simulation or dying if you were on Mars. So.
What happens if you want to scratch your nose?
There's no scratching your nose. That actually was a thing.
Do you have to train for that? I know that people right now, they're out there dealing with their masks and whatnot in the COVID times. It's tough. What's the process of getting used to this? Is it you raised your hand, you submitted an online form and said, hey, I want to pretend that I'm on Mars for this amount of time, and you got an email back and said, great, show up? Or do you actually have to prep for this?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I mean, there are, in my case, I was actually invited into the mission. I was invited into the mission myself, and mostly because I have a background in aerospace already.
Mhm.
And as you can see here, I participated in a weightless flight or a zero G flight. And I did a bunch of other space simulated activities, kind of getting myself ready to train astronauts later. That was my goal. And I recently completed a master's in adventure education, but with a concentration in spaceflight training administration. So I have an aerospace background. I used to work at NASA for a long time. So it kind of it put me in the position I was in to be invited into the mission.
Mhm.
There are other ways, like the European Space Agency has a group called the Euro Moon Mars group, and you can actually just pay and live in their missions, and then conduct the research on their behalf. And so they probably have some sort of vetting process to make sure that you're scientifically literate
Mhm.
and can conduct the research that they need. But it's not like you have to be a PhD in something in order to participate in these missions.
You've always pushed things to the envelope, so to speak. You've skydived. What's this photo right here?
Oh, yeah, I did a 2.4 mile open water swim in Lake Tahoe. Was it last year?
Mhm.
Yeah, no. Yeah, last year.
I- Time goes by quickly now. I
Yeah.
feel like every day is just a day that ends in Y. You've summited to base camp at Everest recently in the last year or two.
Yep.
Have everything that you focused on in the last 5, 10 years led up to this moment? And where do you think you're trying to go in the future?
So, yes, I didn't always know the path. Like 10 years, if you asked me 10 years ago, I'd be living in a Mars simulation. I'd think you were crazy. But each thing that I did, so here's a cool story. A friend of Adam and I's, Tim Bailey, I'm going to call him out because he's awesome. I talked to him like way back and I said, hey, how does somebody become a zero G flight instructor? How do they run zero G flights? And he said to me, he goes, oh, a lot of people come from a skydiving background. And I was like, huh, booked a skydive, became a skydiver. And that was kind of really that moment was the beginning of lots of things that came after that. At the time, I was already contracting or getting ready to start my contracting position at NASA headquarters. And then the NASA part just fueled my dream of working with astronauts. And so fast forward to now, I'm actually in the process of working with some groups, skydiving. That might have been the day I got my skydiving license. Can't remember. It looks like it. But when you come to today, my goal is to do curriculum development and run astronaut training programs. And it could be at NASA, it could be in commercial spaceflight. But for now, I've started my own company to start building out some of those programs.
How does that look? I mean, you're creating curriculum. Obviously, it's not like you can go to the airport right now and say, hey, I'd like 2 tickets to Mars and get there and come back. So who are you training for? Is it for NASA? Is it for Virgin Galactic? Where does that slot in? Or is it we're prepping for the future with hopes that this actually happens someday soon?
Yeah, so really it's all inclusive and it depends on, so right now, some of the programs that I'm building are pre-training or pre-mission activities. So the kinds of stuff that you need to complete and learn before you go into a mission, before you fly to space, before you do anything.
Mhm.
And these are really useful activities to, like, for example, inside the Mars simulation, my company did an activity called the Crew Cohesion, Communication, and Leadership Program.
Mhm.
And it was a whole pre-training program, getting the crew to learn about crew cohesion and different issues that may arise and like how to work through that kind of stuff so that when we go into mission and you're locked in a capsule or you're locked in an ISS or whatever in a habitat for an extended period of time, you already have the tools that you need to be able to, function well as a crew. And so right now that's our focus because it's a little difficult to know at the moment which company to train for or who needs the training or how long is the mission. Is it a stay on the ISS? Is it going to the moon? Is it Mars? Is it just a suborbital flight where you go up and come back?
Mhm.
So the training programs would be different. So we're building all pre-training programs.
Well, let's make this a real conversation. Not that it isn't. Let's do some hard conversations. The Sensoria experience that you went through was an all-female crew.
Yes.
What you're doing right now is fantastic. STEM, women advancing in space is absolutely phenomenal. Have you seen that there is a movement right now? Is it lagging? What should be different? Can it be improved? You're really in the depth of the nuances. What's going on?
Things are shifting in a really positive direction. I will say the Sensoria mission was centered around the female embodied experience, to put women in leadership roles in aerospace, to give them the experience, the network. Like, that's the main goal with the SENSORIA program. Our mission was the first of many that are coming. So it's a venture capital backed program. So there's money to ride this out for a while. And it gives women these opportunities that they wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. And yeah, at the High Seas Habitat, our mission was actually the first all-female crew at that specific location. But that aside, everyone in the mission, they're scientists and engineers, astrophysicists, geoscientists, like everyone is amazing and should have these same opportunities. And I applaud the SENSORIA program, and JJ Hastings was the commander on our mission, but also in charge of the program. Like, her whole goal is to get women the experience that they need to progress and grow the industry. And what's great is it's not limited to women, these missions. The first one was, because that was kind of like a special case. But with missions going forward, her goal is to always have women in leadership roles on those missions.
Wonderful.
So anyone can participate, but there is that one criteria to allow women to gain that experience.
One of the things that we talked about a little while ago that I found fascinating was the level of detail that you went to actually replicate real world in Mars environments. So I am very fortunate that I also know your husband, Dennis. He mentioned when we spoke that there was a delay in how you could communicate that was set up. Explain that so people understand the types of things that you have to work through.
Sure. I forgot to mention that earlier. So part of it being a Mars simulation is if you were actually communicating with Mars, there would be a communication delay. And the way that we simulated that was, if it would take 20 minutes for someone from Earth to send us a communication, so an email, and then, or a file, or whatever, a video or something like that. And then we would get it 20 minutes later, and then we would have to craft whatever response we're going to do. And then we send it, and it takes another 20 minutes to come back. So it was like writing letters to people, like you didn't have real-time communication with anyone on Earth. And so it really was our crew making the decisions we needed to make, and conserving energy when we needed to conserve, we had to make all of those decisions because we knew we wouldn't hear back from someone maybe in 50 an hour, something like that.
Was it on phone or was it on computer? How did that work?
We had our computers, we had our laptops, and we had like internal Wi-Fi, stuff like that. So we couldn't really see stuff in real time. Like, we could go on the internet, but it would take like 20 minutes to load a website.
So no Zoom calls.
Yeah. So, but it was, it really put us in that Mars simulation mentality, and which is really important because the research that was picked, or the research that was proposed to be in our mission, was proposed because it was a Mars simulation, not because, oh, I just want to do some research. Like, every single study or every single project that was being done was focused on Mars because the research paper that comes from it or whatever is Mars centric, which sets them up to be able to do that research later.
Okay. Now, for those of you who are watching, we are with Erin Bonilla. She's an analog astronaut. She just got back from the SENSORIA experiment or exercise in Hawaii, which replicated what it would be like to be on Mars. Great to have you here. If you have any questions, drop them in the Facebook comments. We will be sure to work them into the conversation for you. Erin, why Hawaii? There's lots of places on the planet. Why not just set this up in Maryland or Arizona or Colorado?
Right. Well, there are many of these habitats all over the world. So this one in particular is on the volcanic terrain because that is very closely simulated to what Mars would be like. And so like it's in a very remote area where not even a bird flew over in the time that we were there, as far as we could tell, because we were in the habitat most of the time. But or when you step outside and you go on an EVA or extravehicular activity where we're in the spacesuits, there are no plants really growing. There might be the odd plant trying to grow, but the volcanic terrain is very young in geological terms. So like it's just rock everywhere. And we actually had to go out and explore some of the lava tubes that were out a little ways from us. And I mean, there's no life there is life, but on the microbial scale, not like normal.
Do you check your suits when you go out to make sure that they're pressure accurate? And if you fall and you had a nick, does that mean you fail? If something goes wrong, do they like, oh, sorry, you forgot to action?
You're out.
You're out. You're going home now. And then there's a little Martian simulation, to realize Erin, she got dysentery.
No. So the simulated spacesuits that we had weren't pressurized. So it was already like a step in that not as simulated direction, but because that's a whole other level of risk. Like anyone who's scuba dived or anything like that, the issues with pressurization in your ears. And so we didn't have pressurized suits, but we did have modified like motorcycle suits, like the one piece suits and motorcycle helmets. And so when we had these, I'm forgetting what they're called, but it's like this beanie cap thing that goes over your head.
You're essentially describing a Martian hoodie footy pajama.
Yeah, sure. If you want to call it that. It was really comfortable. Like I was part of a study testing biometrics and anecdotal responses to EVA fatigue or astronaut fatigue when out walking around. And they kept asking, so what was your comfort level wearing the suit, like before, middle, and after an EVA? And the whole time I was like, wow, it was the most it was so comfy. And because the material, it was soft, but it also it was slightly weighted. It was like wearing a weighted blanket. Yeah, they're the blue suits. That's what we were wearing. I'm the one looking weird in the front there, bending over. But what we were doing here is we were actually about to go into a lava tube, which once you go in there, you can't see anything unless you have a light on.
So there's something that looks like solar panels all the way up.
Yeah, that's actually a NASA Johnson study that's happening. I think it's Johnson or Goddard. I don't want to mess that one up. So it's a NASA study that's happening.
But you didn't walk from that distance to the lava tube, did you?
No. So, well, we did walk to that same day probably. But no, the actual habitat is in the opposite direction, further up the volcano. And it's about equidistant, maybe further than that solar panel in the other direction. It was like each one of these EVAs was like an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that.
All right. So Tracy Hager wants to know, were there any outcomes to your research that surprised you?
No, not in my research. And just validation of some of the ideas that we had. We weren't sure what going into this, if our pre-training programs would work or how it would actually materialize in the mission itself. But we got really good feedback from the crew. And so it went very well. And I worked on a educational outreach activity in partnership with a woman named Tess at Blue Origin.
Mhm.
And we got students from University of Washington, the Society of Women Engineers. They sent students over to Blue Origin headquarters, and they got to learn about space analogs or space simulations. And then they sent us questions by email to
Mhm.
Mars.
Mhm.
And then they went on a tour of Blue Origin, and then they came back, and we had responded to all of their questions from Mars. And it was a really great question. So for me, I come from a background of educational outreach,
Mhm.
design, digital strategy, that kind of stuff, and I'm moving into curriculum development. So I spent a lot of my time doing educational outreach activities.
Got it. All right. Next question from Sai. What do you eat in that type of environment? And did you have a favorite meal?
Sai, that's awesome. So Sai was on the mission as well.
Uh-oh. Wait a minute. This is a plant. This is a
But
plant.
I like the plant because it's a really great one. She actually had a study in our mission. It was called Meals for Mars.
Mhm.
And it was testing out in partnership with a company called Elements, who makes freeze-dried, pre-prepared meals, and which would be really useful right now in this time where we're in isolation. But basically, what we would do is there's this bag of freeze-dried food. You would add water, and then you would have the full meal with all the nutrients, and they're built towards high-performance athletes.
Mhm.
So we were testing them out. And we had a couple of times where we could mix those with other foods or things that we had in the habitat. And I think my favorite one was there was this tofu and veggies freeze-dried packet.
Mhm.
And I mixed it with this like soup. Basically became like pho when I was done with it, which was really delicious. But yeah, thanks, Sai.
Okay. So the next question, was Sai a great person to be with or the greatest person to be with? I'm just so one of the questions that I always ask astronauts when I meet them, and like you, I've been fortunate that I have had conversations with several, is what does space smell like? And the answer is metallic, which is kind of interesting. Did you guys end up having a funky smell? Was it what you expected? If you're in close quarters, what was the environment like inside?
Right. Two parts to that. So, in general, I never was like, oh, something smells a certain way.
Mhm.
But what did happen over time was smells, like the strong smells that we have in everyday life, went away because we went down to like, we weren't able to bathe as often as you would. We had to conserve water. We had all that kind of stuff. And so just it became natural smell and not like, soaps and shampoos. And so when someone would take a shower, which you only had 8 minutes of water time per week. So
Per week.
per week.
What happens if you go over? Do you trade? It's like, hey, you give me an extra 30 seconds and I'm going to give you a little bit more of this freeze-dried lasagna.
We could. We didn't have to do that, thankfully. But someone would take a shower and they'd come out smelling like soap and perfume smells or whatever. And it was like so strong, even just in 2 weeks goes by fast. Like we're already in quarantine for longer than that. But you would just smell it and you're like, whoa, like this is the stuff that we smell every day. And we don't notice it because you learn to tune it out. But the other smell, so we had composting toilets.
Worms?
Well, it's a system where you put in, I don't know all the ingredients, so I don't want to mess it up, but you're putting in a bunch of different ingredients into the base of it. And you do your business and then you spin it up and it, the cultures in there do what they need to do. And then after a few days, you have to empty it out and then take the trash out or take the composting material out. So
that's how you make your potatoes.
Yeah, on Mars.
Yeah.
We did watch that movie while we were in there on one of our nights. But yeah, so anyway, it just, it wasn't terrible. It actually was not a bad smell. It just was a smell that was there. It was like, okay, I'm in the bathroom now.
Okay. Now, Tanya wants to know, what lessons did you learn during the mission that can be applied by those now staying at home?
Yes, great question. Um, I think what I found really important was finding me time. So, like in the missions, there's a lot of research that needs to happen, or all the activities you go in there with. And there's a lot of pressure to get them all done by the end of the 2 weeks, right? Or the time that you're in the mission. But you have to be very aware of how you're feeling, because you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself that you can't complete the tasks that you need to do. And I found that for me, I use creativity as my outlet. I'm an illustrator and creative in general. I come from the design background. And so I would use illustration or designing something to help with that creative outlet. And it didn't have to be work related, just something for you time. Another thing was knowing how you're, like, checking in with yourself. And if you're not doing good and you need a nap or you need to step away or whatever, like, just do it. Don't feel like you have to push through something, because you're in it for the long haul and not just, a day or two.
And quite frankly, if you're in Mars or in a simulation, people back on Earth can't tell you to do something because you're there and they're not.
Yeah,
So take
exactly.
the time.
Which you have to be careful of that too, because people on Earth, and I've heard this a lot from astronauts as well, is the ground crew and the flight crew, it's all one crew, and you can never assume. And I heard this from I think it was Ron Guerin. He spoke to us before we went into the mission, and he was like, just remember that you're all part of the same crew, and you can't assume they know what you're thinking. And so you have to be able to express that to the people on the ground, on Mars, wherever. And so open communication is critical.
What role or challenge would you want in your next analog mission? And then the corollary is would you actually have a non-analog mission? Would you go knowing that you might not return?
Well, that's kind of two
questions.
Different questions. Sorry, repeat the first one.
All right. First one is, what role or challenge would you want in your next analog mission?
Right. Okay. So I am very keen to participate in an Aquarius reef-based mission, which is a habitat that's down at 60 feet below sea level.
I know one of those aquanauts, if you want to.
Okay.
She's fantastic.
That's great. That's awesome. I would like to become an aquanaut myself. And I think I've been talking, it's bubbling up with a few different people on how we can try to pull it off and get the funding for it. But basically you scuba dive down and then you can live inside this habitat for however long the mission goes, and conduct research and that kind of thing. So I'm less concerned. Well, actually, I'm interested in the pre-training stuff that I've been working on, but I'm less concerned about the research that happens in the mission, because I want to go do it, and I'll do everyone else's research.
Here's the best part about being
and plan the mission.
So you're 60 feet below the water, and you don't go to the bathroom, which is one of the questions that everybody asks astronauts and aquanauts. How do you go to the bathroom? You don't go to the bathroom inside the habitat. You swim out, and there's essentially a pressurized cone that you pop your head up into, and the fish are smart, and they know if one of the aquanauts is leaving when they're fully suited, they're just out there swimming around. But if they go out in their skivvies, they all get around, because when you poop in the water, they all eat it. It's amazing.
That's so funny you said that. I just heard an astronaut tell that story today, this morning. But yeah, that mission would be cool. The other question, yes, I would go to space, and I would go to the ISS, and I would go to the moon. No, I would not go on a one-way trip anywhere. I'm not interested in that. I have too many things to lose.
Okay, fair enough.
Understanding the risk, I would still do those other things.
So understanding that risk, we are unfortunately running out of time. 3 more minutes.
Okay.
What should we have talked about that we haven't talked about?
Let's see. I think we're pretty good. We could do a whole other talk on the Everest Base Camp trek.
Yes, we should totally do that. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I wish I was on that trip with you. Erin,
I know. We'll go on another one.
we will. We will. It has been an absolute delight as always. If anybody's interested in finding you, because there's so many people that are curious about becoming, you know, a woman explorer like yourself, who quite frankly has achieved a lot more than most people has, which is fantastic, how would they find you?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and it's at EBONINFLIGHT, Ebon in flight.
Ebon in flight.
I wish I could put it up on the screen.
I wish we could. We're not that complicated and technically savvy yet. I'm sure it will get there eventually. Erin, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, it's great to see you.
You too. Bye.